Moving on, and last month's winter storm won't be one we'll forget for as long as we live, that's for sure. Nebraska wasn't the only spot that had to deal with the cold and the snow. Arctic air dropped as far south as Mexico, and destructive power outages were widespread across Texas. I spoke with DTN Senior Ag Meteorologist Bryce Anderson about this storm's place in weather history and what he's watching heading into spring.
This outbreak is truly one for the books. And then the fact that, that it got below zero over such a large portion of the interior of the country is very significant also. We had almost below zero temperatures cover an area that extended practically to South Texas. I've seen a few cold waves or two in my time. This for me is the harshest in more than 30 years.
Bryce, we'll often hear the term polar vortex when talking about a particularly cold weather event. Is that what happened here?
Well, there was a piece of the polar vortex that broke away from the high latitudes and worked all the way south here into the central United States. The polar vortex is usually just a very consistent whirlwind of upper atmosphere winds that spin around the high latitudes north of the Arctic Circle and keep the bitter cold air up to the north. But in this case, the winds actually weakened to the point that there was a portion of that standing circulation that sort of lost its character, lost its identity, then was able to work farther south. That's what allowed that large portion of this really cold air to kind of break away and move south here into the central U.S.
So Bryce, all that being said, what's ahead for us? What are you watching, and what are your concerns as we get closer to planting season?
Well, a macro scale feature that I'm watching, Troy, is that La Nina still is not over with in terms of its impact on our spring conditions. And the downside of La Nina still being an overall part of this weather scenario is that here in the Western Corn Belt, springtime precipitation does not look like it's going to be all that generous for us. And we know that there still is a lot of dryness that has to be dealt with and managed and coped with during this coming spring. So I'm concerned about a dry start to the spring season. Along with that, I think we're going to see a real ping pong back and forth temperature pattern, with March likely to be above normal and quite a bit above normal in some parts of the northern plains and in the western Midwest. But then we get into April and the pattern turns a little bit more to a cooler note. The one thing that I would say is that if it turns a little bit cooler during April, that might delay the onset of the vegetative growth in pastures and kind of weedy areas and so forth. And that actually would help delay their uptake of the available soil moisture, because we're going to need about every drop that we can get the way this particular year is shaping up.
With that expected lack of precipitation that you mentioned, how could that impact producer decisions for the season?
One thing that comes to mind for me right away is that I think irrigation is going to be used for a longer term this year than we're used to. In fact, we could even see some need to run the pivots in order just to get soil moisture into the profile to germinate seeds during spring planting. And so I think that's going to be one thing. That also obviously increases the cost of production for this year. And so that's going to be a feature there. Another notable crop decision that we may see is more grain sorghum being planted. There's a good market for grain sorghum, and growers know that. But just because of the grain sorghum ability to get by on less moisture, that might be another factor that leads to more grain sorghum acreage in the Great Plains this year than we have maybe seen in the past few years.